Welcome to the Bright Ideas Podcast.
So with respect to, I don't want to gloss over the process of creating all your documented business processes. Obviously, if I was being interviewed, I'd have a whole lot to say about that particular topic.
Absolutely.
And I'm happy to chime in, but I'm interested in your opinion on if someone's thinking, okay, well, I got to do that, but how? What does it look like? What are the best practices? You know, am I putting a binder on the shelf? Like literally, what does that mean?
Right. So again, documenting your process, I think I would separate that from creating your binders. When I talk about creating your binders, I'm really referring to the pre-diligence checklist that you would go through. So for example, an acquirer is going to want, if you have a leased premises, they're going to want to see your lease. If you've got employees, they're going to want to see your employee agreements. If you've got contracts with suppliers, they're going to want to see those contracts. So preparing all of those things in a documented fashion is really preparing for diligence or pre-diligence. Yep. Documenting your processes is also important for pre-diligence, but it's more of an operational project, right? It's more so that you can get employees doing the work for you as opposed to doing the work themselves. And I am in no position to preach to the choir on the latter, because I know you are a guru in that space. So feel free, like, what are the best practices for documenting your processes?
Well, so I guess the short answer is you need to make sure that you have a highly detailed checklist for every one or as many of your repeatable processes as possible. And in particular, the processes that cause growth. Because what do buyers want? They want to see a business grow, and they might have their vision for what they're going to do to it after they buy it. But nonetheless, you've got to show them, to get maximum value for your business, you've got to show them that this thing grows month after month after month on the back of all of our processes. And that way it's not all because I'm some wizard magician who's the key man and I'm the only one that can make it grow. So those checklists, there's all sorts of ways to do that. You know, obviously I'm the founder of Flowster, and that's the whole thing what the software is for. You can come in and you can create them in the software, but I don't want to make this a Flowster commercial. So let's say that, you know, if Flowster didn't exist, what the heck would you do? I'd say at a minimum, you know, you might want to find or open up Google Docs and start, like, well, here's what I do. I take my screen and I got a 27-inch monitor, and so I divide it in two. I got a browser on each half. And so on the left half, because most applications you're using to run your business these days are web applications, I'm doing whatever the thing is that I need to create the process for. And so maybe it's, you know, I'm prospecting, or I'm running an ad campaign, or I'm doing a social post, or I'm creating a blog post, or whatever, or a podcast episode. And then on the right-hand side of the screen in that other browser, as I'm doing the thing on the left, I'm taking screenshots and I'm documenting the thing that I'm doing on the right-hand side of the screen, so that at the end of doing the thing, I also have a document which I could then give to you, and you, for the most part, could probably do the thing without having to ask me questions. Now, if you have to ask me a lot of questions, that means my documenting wasn't very good. It wasn't detailed enough. So that's your litmus test. And when you get to the point where, like, and this is what we do in our business all the time, we'll hire a new remote worker from the Philippines or from Mexico or wherever, and we'll give them one of our standard operating procedures. And we know if we get 0 questions and we get the intended result, that our documentation was completely on point. Just imagine that. You could take a new human who's never done this job before, give them your document, and they execute the task flawlessly. Now, just imagine if you had all of the growth processes in your organization documented to that degree. Now, is that a one-day job? No, it's much more than a one-day job. But if you did, and then you're insulating yourself from that risk of, well, you know, you've got Susie in marketing who's a freaking wizard, and what happens if you lost Susie? Well, then all the knowledge just walked out the door with Susie. You don't want that to happen. So whether you're using Google Docs or you're using an application specific like Flowster, some way, shape, or form, you want this to be in an electronic form where there's words and pictures. So, and it has some level of functionality that you're also able to, because you want to use these processes. You don't want to just create them and put them up there on the shelf, because then they become out of date and go stale. So that you can assign that process to an individual or individuals with a due date, so that you always know that whatever that process is, as the manager, when you delegate it to a subordinate, that it's going to get done according to the process, by the right person, by the right due date. And you'll notice I didn't say video, and I'll just speak very, very quickly to this, and then we can move on. Some folks think, well, why don't I just I'll just turn the video capture software on and I'll create my screen. And the reason I don't think video is very good is a couple things. Number one, if your video is, say, 6 or 8 minutes long, how do I memorize everything you just told me in the video? Pretty hard to do, which means that I have to hit play and do a bit and hit pause and then do some more and then hit play and watch some more and then hit pause and do some more, which is not very efficient at all from an execution perspective. This is why pilots don't have a pre-flight video. They have a pre-flight checklist, because they can just look, do the thing, put a tick box, do the thing, put a tick box. But then there's even a bigger issue. You get to the point where, let's say you've now got 100 videos. Well, they were all current when you created them, but guess what happens? They get out of date with every passing day. And so editing or reshooting video is really time consuming. And so now you've got this library of 100 different videos, which isn't giving a great user experience to begin with, but then you got to keep these suckers up to date. That's a nightmare. Whereas if you have a document and you have an image or a screenshot in one portion of your process, how much work is it to just take a new screenshot? Like if the software app changed and now the screenshots don't match anymore, so you take a new screenshot, delete the old one, put the new one in. That's a lot less work than editing and compiling and re-uploading a video to YouTube or wherever you're hosting your videos. So that's my super quick on how to actually do the documentation for your systems.
Makes a ton of sense. And if I may, Trent, I mean, when I kind of relate that back to sort of the idea of selling a company or preparing to sell a company, imagine yourself, you're about to buy something relatively complicated. Like, so imagine you're thinking about buying a new car. And instead of buying a Ford or a BMW, you're thinking about buying a Tesla. Well, a Tesla is really a computerized car, right? And that could be quite confusing for you. It could be like intimidating, exciting on one hand, right? Because it's a brand new car, it's very sexy, whatever. But also like, oh, am I going to be able to figure out the different ways? It's a bit different, bit unusual. Now imagine you're an acquirer. Instead of buying a $100,000 car, you're buying $1 million, $5 million, $10 million business. The fear that buyers have that they are going to screw it up is enormous, right? In some cases, it can be life-changing for them in a bad way if they screw it up. So the more you can allay that fear by having standard operating procedures, to saying that you can mix and match people and swap people out and so forth, you're basically taking away one of the enormous barriers that business buyers have. And for a lot of companies we've been talking about, like if Google is going to buy whatever, Apple, and it's a stupid example, but if you're going to see some massive company acquire another company, well, they've got tremendous resources. They've got legions of people. In the case of a small business, a couple of $1 million in value, the most likely acquirer for business like that is an individual investor, somebody who's leaving a job, wants a business in your market or in your category, and needs to know how to run it. And that person needs SOPs. They need the manual, right? They need the checklists because they don't have a legion of corporate people to run it for them.
You actually, I was going to speak to exactly that. Who your buyer is will greatly impact the extra value created or value detracted by having or not having standard operating procedures. And you kind of hit the nail on the head there. So
it's funny. So like private equity. So the three types of buyers: individual investor, private equity group, strategic investor. Individual investors, somebody who wants a job, buys companies somewhere between $1 million and $5 million is the kind of classic sweet spot there. Private equity groups are the next tranche up. They're the classic buyer of businesses that have a value of somewhere between $5 and $50 million. Interestingly, private equity groups, they're going to lock you in. When they try to buy your business, they're likely to only buy 70% of it. And they're going to try to keep you because they don't have management team in place. And so in a funny way, having SOPs documented is actually a little less important if a private equity group is buying you, because they're going to take you in golden handcuffs with them, right? So they're like, hey, Trent, you know how to run this company already. So like, you're coming, right? And as long as you're coming, I'll let you continue to run it. Yeah. Whereas the individual investor, again, the company that subs 5 million, that person is petrified of screwing up what they bought. And I just think it's so important that they've got stuff documented.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Let's close out then, John, on talking about the negotiation phase. So now you're towards the tail end of due diligence. You're in full on negotiation. And as you mentioned earlier, there are buyers out there who will use this as an opportunity to reduce the price and take advantage of what I call the invested time principle. In other words, the longer you've been at it, the more likely it is you want it to come to a successful fruition because you've emotionally bought the beach house and the Porsche or whatever. But what are some ways to gain leverage during the negotiation phase?
Yeah. So again, prior to signing a letter of intent, so a letter of intent is an engagement ring. It's not marriage. Both parties in a letter of intent can usually back out, but it's a fairly strong indication that somebody wants to buy your business. So before you sign an LOI, I think you want to make sure that the acquirer knows that there are other competing offers, because the LOI will typically include a no shop clause, meaning that you cannot negotiate with anybody else while they do their due diligence. So as soon as you sign a no shop clause, which is in almost every LOI, you lose leverage in the negotiation. So up until the point you sign that, you want to make sure that, number one, they know there are other players that are interested. That'll hold them accountable and keep them honest. Number two, you want to make sure you negotiate any material things that are important to you before signing an LOI. And the acquirer is going to want to do exactly the opposite. They'll be like, hey, Trent, we'll work on that in due diligence. Oh, you want to talk about your earnout? Yeah. We'll kind of nail those details in due diligence. Oh, you want to talk about your salary, your employee, your bonus, your car, like blah, blah. Oh yeah, we'll deal with that in due diligence. The reason they're doing that is for the reason that you said earlier. They're trying to get you into the process, and they're going to have more negotiating leverage once they sign the LOI. So anything that's really important to you, 4 weeks vacation and a car allowance, as an example, if that's like really critical for you, get it signed at the LOI stage. Because once you sign that LOI, you're losing all kinds of leverage.